Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studio. Today we'll be talking about a very important statement issued by the DG ISPR, General Babar Iftikhar, and he said that the real deal and the real issue is about the inclusive and broad-based government in Afghanistan, and we support that and we want that. This has been stated in so many other television channels also. It has been talked about, whether you talk about the government of Iran, or you talk about the Russian Federation, or you talk about the Chinese. They all want that a proper inclusive government should be in place so that the day-to-day affairs could be taken care of. And obviously the Taliban, they have also agreed to it, but it is not something which you can do overnight. It is going to take time. At the end of the day, it's been 40 years of unrest in Afghanistan. Finally, there's a government in place and they really want to look after the affairs there. And on top of that, the most important part is that it has to be a decision taken by the Taliban. Nobody else can force them, because at the end of the day, when we say it should be Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and it has to be Afghan represented, that is something very important. And that also includes 25% of the Tajik population, 10% Uzbeks, Hazaras, Pashtuns, and so forth. Now, this is going to be something important, that how do they decide about it. Now, that is the actual problem when the Western channels, they report that there is no woman included in the cabinet. Obviously, even in the previous government, there were hardly 3. And that was considered a government which was primarily run by Ashraf Ghani, but obviously the stake of Abdullah was there as well, even in the previous election. Now, looking at the current scenario, things will get settled down, but nobody can force or push the Taliban to take certain steps which they don't want to for the time being. At the end of the day, it has to be their decision. Rest of the countries or the heads of the states, they can always give in, their own ideas, or they can always come up with their solutions and the process and the remedies which they have for that matter. But I again would say that at the end of the day, it has to be a decision taken by the people of Afghanistan, the people in charge in Afghanistan. Now, to talk about that, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. We have with us on my right is Air Commodore retired Basit Raza, senior analyst. Sir, thank you so much for your time. Pleasure to have you on the show. And we'll also be talking to Dr. AQAB Malik Saab, expert on foreign affairs and international relations. He's joining us on Skype. Dr. AQAB, pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. And in a little while, we'll be also joined in by Dr. ANDREY KORTUNOV. He's the director of Russian International Affairs Council, and he's going to join us in another 10 minutes. But let me start off from you, Basit Saab. Now, the DG ISPR says that primarily they should have an inclusive government or a broad-based government, primarily where all the ethnic members or people from different parts, whether they are Pashtuns or they are Tajiks or Uzbeks or Hazaras, they should also be included in the government. But so my question is, since the effort has been made purely by the Afghan Taliban to liberate Afghanistan and to make sure that there are no foreign forces, if they have done it, sir, then it is their right to include or not include anybody according to their own choice. Do you think it is wise that countries are suggesting, and in certain cases countries are also trying to persuade them to have this, because this is going to have a long-term effect, because the entire globe is keeping an eye on them. They are under observation in one way or the other. How do you see this equation, sir?
Faisal, actually, if you go by the, there's duplicity in the world. There are double standards. The rule of the game is that winner takes it all. Taliban are the winners of this 40 years of battles and wars and all that was going on. So now they have a right to sort of form a government of their choice and to sort of have a system which is sort of in line with the desires and aspirations of their people. And this is something which is not to be told. It's the very norms. But having said that, the world seems to be divided into 2 camps. One is they are the die-hard opponents, the forces who have been beaten and sort of shunted out of Afghanistan. They are after this demands. Every day there is a new demand coming from them, and they want that they've taken every step, be it freezing of their $9 billion and putting sanctions, and I mean whatever it's possible they are doing it. Their propaganda is going full bore and highlighting the smallest sort of disruption in the Afghan affairs. So, but then there is another group. This is a group of well-wishers who want that this government should succeed and deliver. It's very important. And Taliban have given a commitment. The only thing is that these world leaders, we had just this SCO meeting, and there was world leaders like Mr. Putin and from Chinese leadership and all of them. And they were synonymous in their saying that this new government of Afghanistan has to be given time and space. And there's another thing. Taliban have given a commitment that their government would be inclusive. Give them time. Let them find the right people who are representing a minority like Hazara or Tajik or whatever it is. And also, to some extent, they are aligned with the thoughts of Taliban, because only then this wedding can take place. It's some very radical element cannot run with this group. So that takes time. That selection and that process of finding the right kind of people it takes time. So I would like to say, and this is not what I am saying, this is what Mr. Putin said, and many other leaders have said, that they have to be given their time. And what DG ISPR has said, actually the friends, the well-wishers of present Afghan government, they also want that this should be inclusive government. They also want that the Afghan soil should not be used for any terrorist activities against any other country. And they want that the human rights should be respected. But along with that, they understand and they demand the world that they should be given time. But let me also say here that the present Afghan government has to be careful, because there is a tightrope walking for them. They have just emerged out of woods. They have fought a long war and they had been behind the curtains. Suddenly they have emerged on the world stage. And
so this is also a transition period, right, sir?
Exactly. You know, it's 31st August, it's now 21st September. 21 days is not enough for a group sort of engaged in guerrilla warfare to suddenly come out of trenches and shadows and suddenly become diplomats and politicians and
I think whatever they have done so far, I think they have done it brilliantly.
Exactly.
And on top, I would also say, sir, when Ashraf Ghani was in power, or even let's go prior to that, 4 governments during the last 20 years, twice Mr. Hamid Karzai was the president, sir. Then we saw Ashraf Ghani being the president, and Abdullah also playing a very important role, half Pashtun, half Tajik, then Pashtun element, but an imported Pashtun element wasn't accepted, and we all witnessed what happened later. My point is, sir, then when they formed this government of Hamid Karzai, all the Pashtuns, that's a majority out there, they were neglected, weren't they? Yes. Nobody spoke at that time. Why do they want to push the Taliban now to have an exclusive government? I mean, why would they put people whom they were fighting before, and now you want them to be a part of the same government? I mean, this equation doesn't settle.
It's true. Actually, this is the dual standard which is prevalent in the world, and you know, the people who are demanding that the human rights should be respected, look at what had been happening in their own countries. The policeman can sort of put his knee on the neck of a black person and strangulate him to death.
And they talk about human rights.
They're talking of human, and you know, after so much of hue and cry, there's indignation all over the world and protests all over the world, and only then this man was punished. There are so many before him who did similar things. The guy who shot a person 8 times who was running away. I mean, you break his leg.
Rodney King, if you remember, the LA incident.
Exactly. So all those people, none of them has been punished, and you are demanding from them to
So
sort of respect
racism
human rights.
still exists there.
So
There
this
there
is
is a lot
unfortunate.
of
This is unfortunate.
reality
These
in
are
it.
dual standards. But I think, although we understand that the demands coming from the West are sort of not realistic, and not sort of they are not sincere in demanding what they are actually professing to ask. They are the champions of human rights, and in fact, they are not respecting it in their own countries.
Sir, they talk about human rights. What's happening in Palestine or in Kashmir for that matter? Nobody talks about it. Nobody writes about it. So that is again a dilemma, unfortunately. So if you allow me, I'll also would like to take the point of view of Dr. AQAB Malik. Dr. Saab, obviously you have been writing about it. You have been lecturing about it. This issue, Afghanistan, it's very close to you. Now, looking at the current scenario and the dual standards of the Western world, I mean, let's talk about this idea of inclusive government, and that also on ASAP basis, sir. Do you think it's a wise proposition? That is something which is eventually going to bring in peace and harmony among various ethnic groups or warlords for that matter? AQAB Sahab, your take.
The truth of the matter is that the world is working towards one eventual goal, the goal of inclusivity of all minorities in every government in the world. I think it's important to recognize that. I think it's important for the Taliban to recognize that they're not away from the world, that they are part of an existing global economic political system. And if they want to be party to that, if they want to be included within the existing structures and the process and the systems and the economic environment which will allow Afghanistan to build itself up again, they have to have some form of compromise to an extent. Now, the fact of the matter is, it's okay to say, yes, they won the war. I even said that last time. They did win the war. However, having won the war, they have to be reticent about and understanding about their own population. And that population includes all the minorities. They're all Afghans. And that also includes genders, the female gender, which is half the population or maybe even more. The fact of the matter is, if you exclude these, it's not going to be an inclusive government at all. You're right, pressuring the government too much to back down or to push it in a certain corner, I think will force the Taliban to react rather than to consider and accept. And in this respect, even the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, recently said today, I think, was that the Taliban must seek out inclusivity, that it must allow the minorities, for example, the Uzbeks, the Tajiks, and the Hazaras, by the way, who are a different sect, to become part of that governing structure that governs the whole of Afghanistan for all Afghans. And this is what the world is waiting for. I think it's very important to recognize that having inclusivity is not a bad thing. It's actually productive for the country. And I think excluding half the population from a working environment or schools in that matter is going to be detrimental to the future of Afghanistan and the Taliban, because they will not be accepted. Now, I've had arguments, I've had discussions, and I've heard lots of opinions that, yes, Taliban is in charge now, they can do what they want, but they cannot. They cannot do what they want because they're part of a global community, and the global community has risen in a different way. The global community has moved on after decades of war also. Yes, there has been a lot of hypocrisy. There has been propaganda against the Taliban. It's virulent throughout the media. I recognize that. So I think this is an opportunity for the Taliban. It's an opportunity for the Taliban to take leadership. And by taking leadership, they're showing the world that they want to be part of the world. And in this respect, I heard Imran Khan say that they should incentivize. What that means to me may be different from what Imran Khan may mean. For me, it means that the world should say this is a roadmap, okay? This is the roadmap over the next few years. And this last month and the forthcoming months are also part of the roadmap to show that Afghanistan is not going to be like the 90s, and that the women, for example, every gender are part of that community and must be given equal rights in that respect. Now, I know that the Taliban said that they must be within Islamic Sharia, but that does not negate allowing school children to go to school, females to go to school at all ages, up to university, up to PhD. I think that would be contributing to the functioning of that society, and it will build that society and bridge all the tensions and the gaps between the different ethnic communities. That's how you become inclusive, by allowing all aspects of all minorities on all genders and religious orientations to become part of that society. But if you start excluding one and then another and then another, what you're actually doing is you're going to make Afghanistan fail. And it's okay to say that they've won the war. Yes, and that nobody should dictate. But this is not a dictation by one nation. This is not a dictation by the West or the East. This is understanding global norms now. The global norms are such that inclusivity includes females, includes all minorities. Yes, it's an ideal, and it's an ideal that we should work towards. There are immense hurdles for the Taliban. I was reading that Mujahid, the spokesperson, a deputy minister for communications, was indicating that they would be included, and they're trying to educate their fighters to learn how to interact with females, because many of them are really not that educated. They're not
That's
formally
correct.
educated in the same way that general society is. And as a result, because they've been fighting a lot, they have been indoctrinated for many years with one particular mindset. And that needs to be taken out. I do appreciate that. And I think that's a very important point. However, because without doing that, I think that a lot of these fighters will take it upon themselves to apply law and order according to their own understanding. So they need to be re-educated according to the current norms around the globe and what Afghanistan needs. Now, I've also heard on many news channels where you have Afghans and Taliban saying, you must give us this money, you must do this, you must do that. The fact of the matter is, that's a bit of a dichotomy. When the Taliban says, we want to do what we want, but then the West must, and the East, or any other nation must contribute. But the fact of the matter is, nobody is obliged to contribute anything in the real world.
That
To
is
be
very
part of the
unfortunate,
world,
but
you
that is
must
what
give.
the reality
That's
is.
that's a reality that the Taliban must engage in and must recognize. To be part of the global community, they must accept there are certain social global norms that must be applied in Afghanistan as well. Now, that may take some time. There's no doubt about that. And I
All
think
right.
what matters here is that a roadmap, and a measured roadmap, ticking along and being incentivized by the West and the East, the Chinese and the Russians and other great powers around the world, to see how they're doing. This is an experiment the Taliban are having again, but now it's a different shape. The world has changed, and the Taliban want to be part of it. Now they are governing the country. They have been victorious, but now there's a new world out there, and they can't exist in the previous world that they have. And their interpretation of Islam has to be understood as well by all Islamic countries, which can contribute
But
to their
at the end
understanding
of
how
the
to
day,
negotiate
AQAB,
with the rest.
as they say that it requires two hands to clap. So it has to be from both the sides. Taliban, if they are agreeing, obviously they are going through a lot of turmoil, a lot of problem, a lot of issues, a lot of security issues even now. Look at these latest bomb blasts that unfortunately killed so many people. Or you talk about the Western world that is totally expecting something different from those. And interestingly, one important factor is about the brand name of Taliban. The word T for terrorist or T for Taliban, that was something which was shown to the world. A man with a turban holding a Kalashnikov and a simple soul unfortunately became a terrorist. And the point is that the whole world looks upon them as a terrorist. Now changing that particular brand into some something, which is running the current government in Afghanistan, that has beaten the American or the NATO forces, I mean, that is going to be a very difficult equation for most of the parties, and perhaps this is the real issue. But coming to you now, Dr. Andrey, first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Andrey, for taking out your time and talking to PTV World. Now, perhaps we have been talking about the role of Russia, role of China, role of the regional players, but one important factor, and that is about the push on the Taliban to form an inclusive government, rather broad-based government, and have people from various ethnic backgrounds, Tajiks or Uzbeks or Hazaras or Pashtuns for that matter. Now, don't you think this is the time when the world should support them and help them form a government, rather than putting a lot of pressure on them, putting on sanctions, freezing their accounts and so on and so forth? I mean, don't you think it has to be a commitment that needs to go parallel? The world should support, the Taliban will listen to them. How do you see this, sir?
Thank you for inviting me to this very timely and very important conversation. Of course, there are many people around the world who are not happy with the current interim government that Taliban has established. They say that it would be better to have some old leaders participating to the government, like President Karzai or Abdullah. They say that there should be some representation of ethnic and religious minorities. And they also hoped that probably this government would be led by moderate leaders in Taliban, not like leaders who now run the show. However, we should keep in mind that this is an interim government, and clear enough, there'll be changes in the government. And I think that the main function of this government is just to make sure that some law and order is restored in Kabul and also in the country at large. So I think that we can probably give Taliban the benefit of the doubt, but that also implies how the international community is likely to treat the new leadership of the country, because we should not forget that Taliban is still under sanctions, not just US sanctions, but sanctions imposed on Taliban by the United Nations Security Council. And some of the financial flows to Afghanistan have already been blocked, which might mean that the country will get closer to a humanitarian disaster. Definitely, today Pakistan survives on a kind of safety net, or I would say life support system provided from abroad. But it's easy to say that Taliban should become more inclusive, more tolerant, more technocratic, if you wish. But Taliban has to go on a very tight rope, because Taliban is a movement which has certain ideological and religious principles. And it is exactly these principles that brought Taliban to power. A large part of the Afghan population directly or indirectly supported the principles of Taliban. So if today we ask Taliban to basically deviate from these principles, and if the outside world insists on Taliban dropping these principles, it might mean that Taliban will lose its political influence in Afghanistan, and it will be replaced by other groups which are arguably more radical and less cooperative than Taliban. For example, we cannot exclude a resurrection of ISIS in Afghanistan. Absolutely. We cannot exclude that Taliban can be gradually replaced by Al-Qaeda. Therefore, I think that we all need patience. We all need stamina in working with Taliban, but there are some fundamental issues that should unite all the international community, and the broader coalition we have in dealing with Taliban, the better it is. The worst case scenario is that individual countries, be it the United States or the European Union or Russia or China or Pakistan will try to cut their small deals with the Taliban without really considering more general multilateral arrangements. I think that this is something that should be avoided because that reduces our common leverage in dealing with Taliban. And I think that would probably, if we deal with Taliban on a case-by-case basis, on the individual basis, that would decrease our ability to steer Taliban in the right direction.
All right. Now, sir, Basit Sahab, another important factor, and that is about the approaching 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I remember, sir, last time there were 4 major areas where the Prime Minister, in fact, spoke for over 50 minutes: Islamophobia, Kashmir, climate change, global warming, and all. But, sir, I believe now one of the most important agenda on most of the regional countries would be about Afghanistan also. Sure. So, do you think this particular session would be important as far as the recognition of the current Taliban or the interim regime of the Taliban, sir?
General Assembly is more of a debating forum. It's whatever the resolutions and whatever that goes on, the proceedings, they are not binding. So, but having said that, at least the right picture has to be presented. And I think we expect, and it has also been mentioned by the our representative and permanent representative in the UN, that Prime Minister will be talking about Afghanistan.
Munir Akram Saab, in fact.
Munir Akram Saab. He'll be talking about Afghanistan. And it's important to put the things in right perspective. Like if I look back into the discussion which has gone so far, we have talked that Afghanistan is part of the world community and they have to play the role as per the demands of the Western governments. I asked them, is India not a part of world community? Is Israel not a part of community? Who has given them this open check to carry out all sorts of human rights violations and killings and rapes and use of pellet guns and I mean all this is going on in front of our eyes. And you demand, I would be very happy if this is enforced as an international rule, that whomsoever violates human rights,
there should be no favorites.
Exactly. If this principle is followed, the problems of the world will be eliminated.
Sir, unfortunately, the concept of ethics, values,
exactly,
norms, it doesn't exist in today's politics.
That's true. And then who is asking to give donations to Afghanistan? What Afghans are demanding?
Their own money.
Their own money. And who gave the guys who have frozen their money to confiscate it? This is an act of piracy, to my mind. That it's a sort of money put in your trust. You are a trustee and you sort of don't want to part with it when the rightful owner is demanding for it. So these are the things, these are the duplicities.
Sir, what about the money? What about the money of Hosni Mubarak and his family?
Exactly.
What about the money of Muammar Gaddafi and his family?
Exactly.
What about the money of the former Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein and his family? Frozen, they were tons of gold.
Exactly.
And the interesting part was, forget about the cash. Where is that money? Who is looking after those accounts? I mean, this is again a legitimate question. The point is that the West, they have their own interests. They'll use you till a certain extent, and once you're done and dusted, they don't care.
Exactly. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, that what the West is demanding, almost the same things are being demanded by countries like Pakistan and China and Russia and few other countries who are at the moment seem to be well-wishers of the present Afghan government. They also say that there should be a government which should represent all factions. They also say that the women should be given education. They also say that the Afghan soil should not be used against any other country. These well-wishers of Afghanistan are also demanding the same thing, but their tone and tenor is different. They are ready to give time, they are ready to engage with Taliban rather than trying to isolate them. And this is what is the need of the hour. This is what our Prime Minister has very clearly highlighted, that I am going to sort of, he has stepped forward, that I am going to convince Taliban to sort of have form an inclusive government and go for women's education.
You know, when he
and
said
all
that at SCO, sir, he immediately
This is right.
got in contact with the Afghan authorities.
Exactly. You see, this SCO meeting came at just the right time, and it has all the neighbors, barring one or two. They are the people who have a stake. I mean, they genuinely want that there should be stability. They genuinely want that the whatever is the happening is in Afghanistan should not infiltrate into others' borders. All these neighbors of Afghanistan want that. There is sort of a consensus on that, and this is what the world is also demanding. But these guys who are present in SCO, barring one or two, they are ready to work with Taliban, give them time, and give them a friendly advice, rather than this coercive measures and this draconian measures like confiscating their money and blocking their channels.
Creating hindrances for them, basically.
So the world should actually facilitate them so that they can achieve their objectives, which they committed to the world.
So there's a lot of shortage of food, of medicine, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is again something one has to look after it through the lens of the humanitarian crisis. I mean, one has to support. Pakistan can do whatever is in the given capacity. But unfortunately, sir, this is where the top countries like USA or China or Russia should intervene and help.
Exactly. Allow me to say that when they say that there should be inclusive government, because the Hazaras and Uzbeks and Tajiks are also Afghans, I want to tell them that unfreeze their money, because if you block this money, the people dying will not be only Pashtun, they will not be only Pashto speaking. There will be Hazaras, there will be Tajiks, there will be Uzbeks. They will also be dying. So please don't withhold this money and facilitate them in whatever way. And somebody mentions that the roadmap has been given to Taliban. Who is the architect of that roadmap? These architects were there for last 20
And
years.
is that roadmap
And
in
why didn't
alignment
they enforce
with the government and their thinking?
Exactly. So all these things are actually, I think, what one requires is rational thinking at the moment. Instead of thinking from phobias and our own vision about things, we must, I think, Taliban have given a commitment. Zabiullah Mujahid was, in his first statement, he said that there will be inclusive government, there will be education for all, and all these things. Now, some steps, I think, what Pakistan is trying, and I think it would be wise for the Taliban that they should quickly put their house in order, because the winters are approaching and things would be becoming more and more difficult
For them, yeah.
So they have external challenges, and more important are the
internal issues.
challenges.
Now that is
And
what the problem
to sort
is
of
all
to
about,
face
yeah.
them and to negotiate them, they have to sort of I would say not meet the demands of the West, but I would say that they meet their own commitments which they have committed.
I think
And
that
if
is
they
a
do
million-dollar question, sir.
And if they do that, I am very sure that China and some other countries would accept their government, and then they'll put pressure on other governments to sort of be
Because
more
you know,
rational.
it's kind of a wait-and-see strategy for most of the neighboring countries. They just want to see when things are conducive, they will go for it. But for the time being, it's very blurry. The situation is very fluid. So let me take another important point to Dr. AQAB. Dr. AQAB, now when we talk about these spoilers, remember there was this bomb blast at the Kabul airport, killing around 200 people. 13 of the US soldiers, they also lost their lives. And then Jalalabad and so on and so forth. Now the responsibility has been claimed by the ISIS. Now this Daesh or Islamic State, whatever you call them. Now these are obviously funded by somebody, they are financed, they are given targets, they are allowed to, you know, sort of operate. Now that is the major issue for the Taliban for the moment. But sir, there are a lot of challenges ahead for the Taliban as well, internal as well as external. Let's talk about the spoilers, because the Indians, they very clearly, they believe that a fluid situation in Afghanistan or instability in Afghanistan would suit them, because the moment Afghanistan is going to become stable, it is going to be beneficial for Iran, Pakistan, for the Central Asian states, for the Russians, Chinese, for BRI project for that matter. I mean, that is something which is pretty challenging, and these are the kind of, I would say, tasks assigned to the Indians by the couple of Western countries to make sure that the problem in Afghanistan stays on. Your take, Dr. AQAB?
Well, I do agree that ISK, Islamic State Khorasan, has caused a lot of problems, and it will continue to do so. It is against the Taliban, has been for many years, and it will seek out any opportunity whatsoever in order to destabilize Afghanistan and destabilize Taliban's rule. And it will exploit any opportunity it has, any power vacuums, any instability in Afghanistan to their own needs. However, having said that, yes, there are countries that are not happy with the Taliban being in power. That's obvious. The Western powers and around 50 nations were fighting them, and they lost. The thing is now is that the Taliban also, as I mentioned before, needs to recognize certain issues. I don't think they can compromise with ISIS-K. There's no chance in that. I think ISIS-K and their philosophy is an anathema even to the Taliban, which shows how far out they are. If, on the other hand, other powers are utilizing access into ISIS-K to undermine the Taliban, that's another point. And that's primarily to cause problems within the region. Now, Taliban, no doubt, is going to be seeking advice and seeking commitments and linkages with other countries such as China and Russia and Pakistan, obviously, which are, to some extent, with the exception of the Russians, opposed to India. And India may exploit those differences between the Taliban and ISIS-K to utilize certain facets that they have, probably on the ground right now in Afghanistan, to undermine the Taliban. There's no doubt about that. However, I want to say this to them, that whoever is trying to do this will just continue the war. There's something that we've all forgotten, I think, and all the international media has forgotten, is that 43 years of war has ended. And this is a big deal, I think, because I've been following this war for many, many years now, and looking at the problems, one turn and then another phase come through, and more carnage and more death and destruction. And I think it's time to recognize that if there is some stability, we should shore it up. And you're right to some extent that the Western powers must allow a certain leeway for the Taliban to set themselves up. In fact, in doing so also, that the Taliban could be, in one way or another, co-opted to fight against the ISIS-K. So these spoilers that you mentioned, which probably do exist, because they exist in Pakistan as well, as far as the Indians are concerned, by upsetting the balance in Pakistan, which they have been doing, and there's ample evidence in this respect, may well do so to upset Taliban and thereby break the linkages with Pakistan as well. So it's a very complex situation where there are many power centers, and it's very difficult to explain just in a short 5-minute clip on the TV that the power centers and the vying between different nations, and it's going to be very, very, very unfortunate that Taliban and Afghanistan in general will be plunged back into some form of civil war again, which is detrimental to the whole environment. I think it's very important for the international community to recognize that this is an opportunity for them as well, an opportunity for them to establish some form of governance structure that is feasible for all. Yes, the Taliban has responsibilities in this respect, and the more understanding the Taliban have with the outside world, the more likely they are going to succeed and not allow these spoilers to corrupt the situation as it is now. And I think that countries like India are duplicitous in this respect by causing instability within Afghanistan, because they are opposed to Taliban, there's no doubt. And in doing so, they will cause disruption, and that disruption will be counted to them in the end. If you think about it, in the 90s, many Kashmiris were trained by the Taliban in Afghanistan. I know this personally because I was studying that war And I was in Afghanistan many times watching this happen. And as a result, if the Indians want any peace and stability in their own environment, and they don't want a relapse into a general war within Kashmir, then they have to take responsibility as well and try to stabilize the situation in Afghanistan rather than upset it. I think it's important for the
This is
Russians
exactly what is
to
happening.
tell
I
the
mean,
Indians
Dr.
to do this
AQAB,
as
since
well.
I'm running
So
out of
the
time, I would
Russians
like
have
to.
a direct linkage with India. Other
Yeah,
countries may not so have that
yeah. Now,
are party and acceptable to the Taliban.
all right, now let me put the final question to Dr. Andrey. Dr. Andrey, the negative role of India is very obvious now. Look at the disinfo labs, I mean, and what they were up to. Look at the kind of information they're spreading, or disinformation rather they're spreading. I mean, talking about that Pakistani commandos are at the 5th floor of the Serena Hotel in Kabul, which has only 2 floors, and so on and so forth, and blaming Pakistan that they went into Panjshir and all. I mean, the whole world knows that the Taliban were very much in control of the Panjshir area, and later on they took over. The ousted president or the vice president, they ran away with millions of dollars, opening up their accounts in UAE and all. I mean, these are the realities. But the negative role of India, since it has been ousted throughout in one way or the other. I still remember the Russian foreign minister, when he was asked by Mr. Jaishankar, I remember, or Mr. Rajnath, I'm not exactly sure, but that why isn't India included in the Tri-Cup Plus? He said, well, we'll only include those countries which matter. And Pakistan matters, Chinese matter, and Russians matter. So the role of the Indians has been minimized. But now they are trying to make sure that through the negative propaganda or through all the illegal means, perhaps they are trying to engage with the IS and the other non-state actors to create instability in Afghanistan. Your take, Dr. Andrey?
Well, let me try to defend India a little bit. First of all, I think that India has significant economic interests in Afghanistan. Over the last 20 years, they invested more than $3 billion into the country. Moreover, if you follow the public attitudes in Afghanistan, basically Indians are perceived in a positive way by the majority of the Afghan population. India is not perceived as a villain in Afghanistan. But I agree with you that India was too late to reach out to Taliban. And unfortunately, in many cases, Indians do not see a difference between Taliban and, for example, ISIS, Khorasan. Moreover, they believe that Taliban was assisting Al-Qaeda in putting together the so-called Al-Qaeda Indian subcontinent, AQUIS, which of course can play a detrimental role in Indian security. But in the end of the day, I think that Indians will be forced to start talking to Taliban. It is in their best interests because any alternative to Taliban will be detrimental to the Indian security. And of course, this is something that they should keep in mind. So I'm not that pessimistic on the ability of neighboring countries to somehow engage India in a positive way. Moreover, my take is that this situation in Afghanistan might, under certain circumstances, become an issue that can, not tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow, but in some time from now, become an issue of reconciliation between Islamabad and New Delhi. Because in the end of the day, both Pakistan and India would benefit from stability, economic development, and prosperity of Afghanistan. I think that we can start working on that, maybe in the framework of SCO, maybe in other frameworks, but it's better to have India on our side than to have India ostracized and abandoned. I think a lot will depend also on the US position, because India often follows the United States approach to Taliban and to Afghanistan. And again, it's still not clear how the United States will treat Taliban next year, in 2 years, 3 years from now. But I think it would be a major mistake for any country to bet on more instability, more clashes, more civil war in Afghanistan, because it will backfire. Maybe not
Correct.
today, maybe not tomorrow, but it will backfire like when the United States supported mujahids in Afghanistan back in 1980s. Ultimately, it backfired against the United States.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Andrey KORTUNOV. I mean, thank you so much for your input in our program. And Dr. AQAB, was a pleasure having you, sir. Thank you so much for your time as well. And Basit, thank you so much for your presence as well, sir. Thank you so much for your time. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you tomorrow, inshallah, at 8:05. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.